Welcome to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber, and our guest this week is Brent Walls. He's a riverkeeper with the Potomac Riverkeeper Network. Brent, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Russell.
What is a riverkeeper?
A riverkeeper is essentially a watchdog organization that keeps an eye on their jurisdiction, their river, their watershed, and their focus is to stop pollution. And that either is illegal pollution or legal pollution.
And what's an example of legal pollution?
So an example of legal pollution is every large facility, industry facility has to have a permit to discharge. So they're legally discharging a certain amount of pollution.
Our system of regulation allows companies to pollute the Potomac.
That's correct.
And how would you stop that? I mean, the laws are set up to say you may pollute the Potomac. So how do you change that?
Well, I mean, going back a little bit, the Clean Water Act of 1972 said that we're going to try and clean up all the rivers so there's zero discharge, zero pollutants going into our rivers by 1982. So obviously we clearly missed that deadline, and we're still polluting. We're still putting stuff in our waterways. So what we have to do right now is trying to limit these facilities, these industries, from violating their permit, their existing permit. And each time it comes up for renewal, we try and throttle it back, try and put more limits on their facility.
Well, let's just backtrack a second. The permits allow them to pollute up to a certain amount.
Correct.
And the law, as you pointed out, says we're trying to eliminate all pollution by 1982, which was 30-some years ago.
Yeah.
40-some years ago.
Right.
30-some years ago. Well, how did that happen? How, if the intent of Congress was to prohibit pollution, how did we come to the point where we're permitting pollution?
That's a really good point. Now, the theory was to use the permit system to slowly reduce the pollution until it goes to zero. But unfortunately, with demand of energy and more chemicals are being produced out there, it's virtually impossible to start to reduce it. Not impossible, I should say. It is possible, but it's going to cost a lot of money, and there's just no money.
The recent news about the Potomac is that there was a spill upriver around Columbia. Why don't you tell us what happened?
Sure. A company up in Luke, Maryland, Verso, it's a paper mill company. There was a train car loading of this chemical, a latex chemical. And
it's used in making paper.
It's used in creating the paper, have that sheen to it, so really nice fancy documents that have that sheen. And so it's used in that process. And in that process, from the train car, they left a valve open, and about 4 hours worth, 10,000 gallons spilled into the treatment system of the facility. That treatment system then delivers it to a wastewater treatment plant. By the time the plant figured out that there was a discharge, it was already going into the river.
So it wasn't treated?
Now, this is the confusing part of everything. The treatment plant says that they treated 87%. Now, we don't know if 87% of the 10,000 gallons was treated or 87% and the remainder was 10,000 gallons.
I see. So that's still unclear?
That's still unclear, correct. Yes.
Who runs the treatment facility?
UPRC, Upper Potomac River Commission.
Okay.
It's an entity that was formed from Luke Paper and then the two dams, Savage River Dam and Jennings-Randolph Dam. And they operate a couple of different wastewater treatment plants.
All right, so in any event, the 10,000 gallons, treated or untreated, end up in the Potomac.
Correct.
And did it kill fish? Is it a hazard to drinking water supplies? What happens?
It did not, actually. DNR was out there to collect some samples. MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment, was out there also to collect some samples. There has been no evidence whatsoever of fish kills. We're still under some research to whether or not it has any long-term effects. But looking at the chemical makeup, the material safety data sheet, it suggests that it's a very benign chemical. There's not a lot of persistence in the environment, so it'll dissipate really quickly. And there's also this notion that the treatment plants, the water treatment plants for your drinking water downstream would be able to handle removing that substance out of the plants.
Although I heard that, for example, some water treatment facilities shut down when they heard about the
That's right. I think
spill. Like Pawpaw shut
like Pawpaw did shut down. That's correct.
Any others shut down that we know of?
We have Hancock shut down, and I don't think and Shepherdstown shut down, but I think Hagerstown was still operating. So yeah, the worry was there that their facilities, there's other chemicals within it, within this latex spill, that they thought would interfere with their systems. And a lot of the systems that we're talking about are pond systems, and so they didn't want to have any major kill-off of all the bugs at the bottom of the ponds that do their business. And so, yeah, they did shut off the intakes and worked on their reserves.
Well, as the riverkeeper for the Upper Potomac, when you heard about this, what did you do?
Well, my first response was, one, to find out more detail. I wanted to know what the chemical makeup was, because we did not know what it was. It just said latex. That's all they said. I was extremely disappointed to realize that even MDE didn't know the makeup of the
Maryland Department
of the Environment. They did not know the chemical makeup until 4 days later. So Verso, the company, should have had that information to MDE right away so they can understand what exactly they're looking for when they do tests. Next, my step was to try and find where it was, to track it, to see how fast it's going. And where it's moving downriver. ICPRB, Interstate Commission for the Potomac River Basin, which is an entity that manages the water supply of the Potomac River and its watershed. They have a great alarm system, so when a facility has an issue, they contact MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment. They then contact ICPRB, which then relays information down to all the intakes. They had a model that said it's this pollution plume is going to be at A, B, and C different facility or different intakes downriver. My job was to find out, is that accurate? Is the model accurate? And it wasn't. The plume was actually arriving about a day and a half early compared to what the modeling was.
Could you see the the latex in the water? Did you see it?
I did. I saw the plume.
What color was it?
It's kind of like a very light green pea soup, and it had some consistency. If you ever seen a stream after a major rain event and it's brown, has all the floating sediment, this was green. It was bright green.
How big was it?
It was at least a good 1.5 miles.
Wait, the whole Potomac was light green for 1.5 miles?
Yeah.
Or was it just like in the middle of the river?
No, all from bank to bank, right. And for at least 1.5 miles stretch, and it'd get bigger and smaller based on the flow of the river because we have several dams.
Did you get pictures?
Yes, lots of pictures.
Where are the pictures posted?
They're on my Facebook page, Potomac Riverkeeper Network, and Upper Potomac Riverkeeper.
All right, so if people want to see pictures of the Potomac in a light green color.
If they want to see that, they're more than welcome to see that. And I also submitted the pictures to the Cumberland Times, and they used some of those photos for their news. The other interesting thing, too, is in contacting Maryland Department of the Environment, they said, we're understaffed because it hit on a weekend, and they asked me to keep them posted as to where it is and take pictures and find out, how it's moving. And so I did that.
Where were you taking pictures from?
So Pinto, up on the North Branch, it's between Cumberland and Westernport. Mm-hmm. And then also at the Allegheny County Fairgrounds in Cumberland, Pawpaw, the Bonds Landing, just south of Pawpaw.
You were driving along the river.
Right.
And so coming down with it. Where is it now?
Now it is past Shepherdstown and headed towards the DC region.
We're talking October. We're taping October 5th, so we're talking now October 5th, past Shepherdstown. And is the river still green or is it breaking up?
No, yeah. I mean, with all the recent rains that we've had, it's diluted to the point you can't even tell. And then you have all the sediment coming in from the watershed.
Is there an investigation of what happened, and who's doing the investigation?
Maryland Department of the Environment is doing an investigation to find out exactly what happened. Apparently, it's one particular person's fault for leaving the valve open. But that's all fine and dandy that one person is the problem. But there's some questions that I have to understand. And you know, when the plume went into the wastewater treatment plant, and the treatment plant says, "Hey, something's wrong here," why didn't they just shut down the treatment plant's discharge?
To hold it in.
To hold it in until they could figure out what's going on before they just let it go.
And the treatment plant is operated by this commission.
This commission, correct.
So you have questions for the commission too.
I have questions for the commission, and I also have some questions for MDE. Why didn't Maryland Department of the Environment have the chemical information? They should have all the chemical information for all chemicals that are being handled and managed next to the river.
Now it sort of brings back memories of the spill in Charleston.
Yes, it does.
A couple years ago. And you're saying, fortunately, not as bad as that.
Yeah,
why not as bad? Why not?
Well, for one, the chemical that was spilled on the Elk River in Charleston, it had a very high level. It stayed separate from the water. It had a high VOC content, volatile organic compound, and it was much more toxic. It had an aerosol; you could smell it. And it got into the system long before they figured out what was going on. So in that sense, there was no immediate warning to regulators. They just kind of kept it under wraps for a while until someone reported the smell. So by then it was too late.
And we knew about this right off the bat.
We knew about this right off the bat.
How did you hear about it?
I heard about it through, there's several river guides up on the North Branch. And they heard about it through I believe it was a call to Cumberland Times, and they're always out on the river all the time anyway. And so they saw the water, they saw the green color, and then they started hunting around, find out what was going on. Yeah. So I got that message from them. This was a day after.
And the plant itself was on the Maryland side or the West Virginia side?
It's on the Maryland side.
It's on the Maryland side.
Yeah, it straddles both sides actually. There's parts of their facility that are on both sides.
Is there a West Virginia investigation that you know of? Is the West Virginia Department of the Environment looking at it?
No, they're not. No. They're just deferring all to Maryland.
Will there be a federal investigation of what happened? Will the federal EPA be involved?
Most likely not.
Why not? Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't that?
Well, it's a good question. A lot of because of the NPDES program, National Pollution Elimination Discharge System elimination, surprising, the federal government gives that right to the states to handle. So in this situation, it'll be up to the state to handle the outcomes and the aftermath. Now, there could potentially be some fines that'll be levied to Verso, but that remains to be seen.
If we don't know anything about this chemical, how can you say we're okay?
Well, I can say now. I mean, I didn't, a couple of days afterwards, it was pretty much put it out in the news. No one go to the water, no one get in the river because we don't know what this is, what it could do to you. And it was a good idea to start closing the intakes, but it hasn't reached any intakes. Cumberland doesn't get their water from the Potomac River. So
where do they get it?
They get their water from a lake that's north of Cumberland.
Okay.
So a large reservoir up there. So they didn't have to worry about an intake there. The next closest one was Paw Paw. So it was a few days away. But by that time, we found out what it was.
Now, there are thousands of chemicals that are unregulated. And this is one of them, right? Do we know that this is an unregulated chemical, or we just don't know whether it's regulated or not?
It is a regulated chemical. It has an MSDS. It's not a chemical that these facilities typically test for. Styrene and betadine are the two chemicals that were of concern. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily tested for. It is a regulated chemical. And it's not as of a quality or of a concern as what the state thought.
Well, let's put aside for a second the
Sure.
spill and talk about the state of the Potomac River. Would you swim in the Potomac River?
Sure, do it all the time. My family
You
and I
do?
do all the time.
You do swim. So you trust the cleanliness of the Potomac River.
I do, except for right after a rain event.
What happens after a rain event?
Well, there is a period of time when the river becomes chocolate right after a rain event, and that's due to a lot of the sediment that's coming in. But we also have a lot of issues upriver. There's a lot of CSOs, combined sewer overflows coming out of Cumberland, LaVale. Those areas, raw sewage after a major rain event gets discharged into the river. And that they're in the process of trying to work that out, like a lot of facilities, a lot of towns across the nation. So right after a rain event is not the best time to go swimming or fishing or anything of that nature, just because of all the stuff that's been resuspended.
What about eating fish out of the river? Would you eat fish out of the river?
I would. I would eat the fish if I could catch them.
But if someone gave you a fish out of the river, you'd feel comfortable feeding it to your family?
Yeah, I would. I would. I would probably do a real close look at the outside of the fish to see if there's any lesions on it. Lesions are usually a sign of this intersex condition.
What is intersex and what's causing it?
Intersex fish are when a fish has both male and female organs inside. So there'll be male fish with ovary cells on the inside. And there's really no complete understanding of what the cause is. There's suggestions that it is a pesticide that is being used. USGS is currently working on that process to try to figure it out.
Another thing that we hear is that people flush their pharmaceutical products down the toilet, and that might be a cause?
That is a possibility. That was what was first looked at as pharmaceuticals, but they're starting to narrow that down. That is because there's not a lot of pharmaceuticals in the farming region, and that's where a lot of the intersex fish are found. And they're not just found here. They're found in Michigan. They're found in a lot of other different tributaries and streams and lakes too. And in those areas, it's not always urban. So it's very rural. So you can't really necessarily say that it's a large amount of pharmaceuticals going into the system. So they had to start looking at other things.
Someone brought me some fish from the Cacapon River, and I grilled them up and ate them, but then thought back, oh, that looked a little funny. Why wouldn't I eat an intersex fish?
Why wouldn't you eat it?
Yeah, why wouldn't I eat it? I mean, is there something unhealthy about eating an intersex?
That is unknown at this time. However, I would also be very cautious, like you, if I knew that it was an intersex fish. The problem is we don't know. In order to find out if it does have both organs, you have to go down to the cellular level. So it seems to be more smallmouth is the more receptible fish. Some of the other fish they're not exhibiting these signs of intersex.
But as a cautious person, which you are, and knowledgeable about the river, you seem to be okay with swimming and eating the fish out of it, even though you're sending the counterintuitive message that there are intersex fish in the river, and I'm okay with eating them just as long as there's no lesion. So I'm wondering, why are you saying that? Why are you giving the green light to our, and I've heard a lot of people say, don't eat fish out of the river. It's sort of like a common thing. Don't eat fish out of the river, but you're a knowledgeable guy about it, and you're saying, eat fish out of the river.
It's about caution. It's not having a whole lot. Remember not too long ago, the issue about mercury in our fish. Mercury, you can get your hair tested for mercury. And if you go to a lot of your river access, you'll see little notes from DNR that says, we recommend you only have so many portions of fish per week, per month, whatever. And that is as a result of mercury. Mercury bioaccumulates in your system. And so if you keep the fish intake, which would keep the mercury intake down to a minimum, then you're going to be fine. If you eat tons of fish every single day, you can build that mercury up.
Where's the mercury? Why is there mercury in the fish?
Well, mercury is coming from aerial deposition from our coal-burning power plants, primarily. Okay. And so a lot of your large lakes and rivers that are close to coal-burning power plants, they're going to be more susceptible to mercury. And so in the same sense with intersex fish, there's no specific link how it's going to affect us. There is no, relevant toxic that's going to bioaccumulate in us. However, it is a concern because you have something that is genetically affecting a fish, and it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. What else is it doing? We're still drinking the water that the fish is swimming in. And our water treatment plants aren't necessarily cut out to filter out pesticides. They filter out sediment and bacteria and some metals and that kind of thing. But there's 10,000 chemicals out there that it doesn't get rid of. So we're still consuming those chemicals. And so I'll eat the fish because I'm still drinking the water.
Is farming, pesticides from farming, chemicals from farming, or industry more of a threat? How would you rank the threat?
Well, I guess maybe the industry that produces the pesticides, but it's also how it's being put out there and how it's being regulated. That's the really problem, is how it's being regulated, and then once it's regulated more strictly, then when its application goes onto the farm fields, we're going to have less of an issue. And then we can also backtrack a little bit and look at the manufacturers and the companies. They don't really know what the acute effects are of these chemicals.
Of the pesticides.
Of the pesticides,
right.
Yeah. So because EPA is way behind in getting that information. What are the acute toxicities?
What are the primary threats to the Upper Potomac at this time?
Well, interestingly enough, sediment is one of our biggest primary threats. So any kind of sediment coming off of farm fields, coming off of our urban centers, and surprisingly enough, dirt roads. We have miles and miles and miles of dirt roads. So sediment is probably at the top of the list because sediment brings all kinds of other things that are tied with the sediment. Second would be bacteria. There's a lot of problems with bacteria coming from farm fields in the South Branch, chicken farms, CSOs, combined sewer overflows, a lot of septic systems that are failing, and some straight pipes that are happening in various places. So sediment, bacteria, and then from there we have various different metals that are an issue, and those are legacy problems.
Legacy meaning what?
Meaning they've been there for a while, they're in the river bottoms, they're on the banks of the river because of past industry.
You mentioned before we went on the air that we were talking about the fracking fields.
Yeah.
On the Upper Potomac. What are the threats from the fracking?
Well, they're an up and coming threat, so they're not right here and right now. So the problem there is you have these, again, another host of chemicals that could occur from these fracking sites and the backwater that comes up after they frack and retrieve the gas. And if it's not carefully contained and managed, those pollutants can get into our river system or into our groundwater.
Do we know that they in fact are?
Getting into our river and groundwater? The evidence is out there that suggests that it is, but there's no supposedly conclusive evidence that says that it is for sure. However, it's an awful convenience when you have several residents that have had no problems with their well water. Fracking comes to town, all of a sudden they have flammable faucets. And that does occur all over the place. It's trying to figure out if the chemicals that are being used specifically in the fracking are getting into our well water. That we're not sure of. But the methane they're retrieving, the natural gas, is coming up through various movements, various pathways.
What about facilities up and down, industrial facilities like this paper plant up and down the Potomac with permits to pollute and so forth? What are the major threats from those facilities?
Well, I think the major threat from those facilities is violation of their existing permit, and whether or not they're going to continue to try and reduce the pollution that is coming out of their facility. And so right now with the UPRC and Verso, actually UPRC, the treatment plant for Verso, the paper mill, we're currently in a legal fight over their permit right now. We're wanting
Before this spill.
before this bill.
Before this spill happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Want to continue it, maybe at another time.
Sure.
If people want to sign on with Potomac Riverkeeper, the website is?
www.potomacriverkeepernetwork.org.
All right. And until next week, thank you for joining us. If you'd like, make comments on the video wherever you see it, or you can write dmcdirector@macicehouse.org. Until next week, I'm Russell Mokhiber. Thank you.